First, we'll begin with prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Almighty God, we give you thanks for all the religious throughout the world who serve the people of God. We thank you for all those who've served in our diocese, those who might have taught us or worked at our parishes. We ask you to continue to increase vocation to religious life, that more young men and women might answer the call to serve you in this special way. Continue to bless us throughout this Easter season, and we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So this series is focused on vocations. It started off with talking about the priesthood, the ordained priesthood, and then we last week talked about the common priesthood of the faithful, the laity, talked about married life and the family life just a little, and now we're talking about religious life. And so the focus of the talk has been why there are crises and vocations, and so I think they're all connected, and I'll kind of end already saying some of the things that I've already said in the past talks. But just to give you some more statistics, because I like statistics, so that's kind of been a theme of this series, and I think maybe the series was just a veiled attempt for me to show my statistical skills. A word's hard to say, my skills with using statistics. So, but statistics tell us things about reality. So that's why the church uses them, just like any other group uses them. It tells us about reality. And so this is from Pew Research that just came out a few days ago, actually on my birthday, the 12th. And so, it was like how timely that this came out. And it was actually kind of like a continuation of something they had already done in the past. So I guess every time they do the poll, they just update it. And there's 9 facts about us Catholics. So if you want to look that up in your own time, 9 facts about Catholics or us I'm seeing what I'm getting wrong here. This is a literal reading. It's U.S. Catholics. Because I was like, Pew, they're not Catholic. I was like, they're not Catholic. And now I'm realizing it's U.S. Catholics. So 9 facts about U.S. Catholics, not about us Catholics. So don't ever literally read. That's the journalist in me. So, but this is a cool 9 facts. And again, I invite you to read that yourself because it really gives a very interesting picture of the church in the U.S. right now. But according to Pew, there are 52 million Catholic adults. So that's about 20% of the adults nationwide. So it's a good percentage, right? Almost a quarter. And if you add in, of course, it's not counting children. So if you add in children, it bumps up to like 70-something or 80-something million Catholics in our country. So we're a pretty large number. Of course, it's gone down. I think it was saying that it used to be about 24% in the 2000s. So it's we're shrinking, but we're still a significant number of the adults in the U.S. But this is to kind of show you the demographics of our church, and this is something I've talked about and is sort of pertinent to our talk about the religious, because 58% of U.S. Catholics are 50 or older. So that means that a good majority of our Catholics are over the age of 50, and anyone who can go to church, pretty much any church and anywhere in the country, unless it's maybe a church that has a particular large young adult community, can see that, right? You see that most Catholics are over the age of 50. Not to say anyone here is in that. I don't want to assume, who knows what your age is. I'm not going to assume people's age. But I'm saying if you go to a mass, this statistic is very true. And that's from December 21st, 2021, that about the 58% of U.S. Catholics over the age of 50. Now, a really positive fact for our part of the country, and it doesn't really have much to do with our area, it's more probably South Louisiana, but 29% of Catholics live in the South. So that's the largest percentage out of the Midwest, the Northeast, which used to be like the bastions of Catholicism, even the West. So we have the largest number, but that's mainly because of Texas and Florida. So Texas and Florida are included in that, and so a lot of people live in those 2 states. Texas has 14 dioceses, 2 archdioceses. I think like 3 of the 5 largest dioceses in the country. So if I had to guess, Texas is probably a big reason that the South has so many Catholics. Another statistic is 28% of Catholics attend Mass weekly. I kind of talked about this last week. Not a large number, but at the same time, not very surprising. So yeah, only 28% of Catholics attend Mass weekly. So that's some of the 9 facts. Again, I encourage you to look at that yourself. It just came out this past weekend, and it really gave a good picture of our church and what our church is probably going to look like going into the future. It's going to continue to shrink in the Midwest and the Northeast, and continue to grow in the South because of places like Florida and Texas, as well as in the West because of course, California and a few other places. And actually, recently, Nevada, the Diocese of Las Vegas was just elevated to an archdiocese. So that shows you how much the church is growing in the West. Like, that doesn't happen very frequently. And so the fact that the Pope last year saw fit to make Las Vegas an archdiocese shows you that he expects that it's going to grow more. Because people like Las Vegas and people will continue to move there. And so it's going to continue to grow. So our church is growing in some parts, but it's not growing in other parts. So that's kind of where we are as a church. Now going into religious, these are just some statistics about religious in the world. So men religious in the world, right now there are 49,774. And that's mostly brothers. It doesn't really include the priests. So if you added the priests into that number, it will be a higher number. But it's just including like religious brothers and other men who fall in that kind of category. Monks and hermits and people like that. Women religious, there are 608,958. So a large number, but in the 1960s, I believe there was 1 million. So large number, but a large decrease. Okay, that's just kind of an omen of the things to come. Okay, so a study commissioned by the National Religious Retirement Office, which is the group that raises funds for retired religious. So when we do that collection every year from the USCCB, they're the ones who run this. And they kind of do this long sort of multi-year plan where they basically prepare for how many religious will be retired by this time and how much money we need to raise. And I read some of the report and it's really interesting. So they deal with all of that. So they have projected in one of their reports that by 2034, there will only be 11,432 female religious in our country. So 11,432. Okay, so it's a pretty big drop. According to a study by that same organization that a Crux article that I was reading highlighted, members of religious communities who are 70 or older outnumber those who are younger than 70 by nearly 3 to 1. The data found that the average age of a female religious in the U.S. is about 74.8 and 67.6 for men. So the average age, okay? By 2025, and this is from the USCCB based on a 2014 study that they used, and they were kind of given a similar outlook to what this 2023 study said. By 2025, it is estimated that religious sisters, brothers, and religious order priests over 70 years of age will outnumber those under the age of 70 by nearly 4 to 1. So 4 to 1 is what they said, okay? So I'm just trying to paint you the picture of religious life in our country, okay? So the official Catholic directory, which is sort of the church's yearbook that gives a sort of synopsis of the church in the throughout the world. So religious sisters in the U.S., and I'm going to give you 2022 because that's the sort of most recent study. So 2022, 36,322 in our country. So 2022, and they're saying by 2034, they're expecting that to drop to about 11,000 sisters, okay? Because about 2/3 of those sisters are probably 70 and older, right? And so they're getting up there in age. Brothers, right, in 2022, so there were 3,516 brothers, and the religious priests, 10,234. So I want to kind of rewind back to 1965, okay? So I told you that in 2022, there are 36,322 sisters. In 1965 in our country, there was 178,740 religious sisters. So that's a loss of 100,000 or more. Okay. Brothers, in 1965, there were 12,096. Today, there are 3,516. Again, a pretty steep decline. Religious priests is about a little over half. There were 22,762 in 1965. Today, there are 10,234. Okay, so as bad as the priest crisis is, the religious crisis is worse. Okay, so kind of giving you all these negative things. Now I'll try to give you some upbeat. After really kind of painting you this very negative picture about religious life in our country, I'll give you some positive news. So just like the study that I used for the priesthood, when I did the priesthood talk, I used a study that the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate from Georgetown, every year they survey all the guys getting ordained. Not all the guys respond, but majority of them do, and they kind of form different statistical sort of outcomes about the different guys. And so they do the same thing for men and women who are professing their perpetual vows. These are religious who are at that final stage of making what they call the final or perpetual vows. So if you remember Sister Heather from the Sisters of the Sorrows, last year, I believe it was last year, she made her perpetual. No, I take that back. Did she? Yes, it's right. She made her perpetual vows, okay? So she made her perpetual vows last year, so she could have actually been maybe one of the people surveyed in this study. But before I get to that, just a little bit more bad news, and then we'll get to good news, okay? So they received a response, and this is the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate from Georgetown. They received a response from 508 of the 737 major superiors, and those are the ones who are over the different religious congregations and orders, for an overall response rate of 69% among religious institutes. And all the major superiors provided contact information for 144 members, 68 women and 76 men who professed perpetual vows in religious life in 2023. A total of 438 major superiors, 87% of the respondents, report that they had no one professing perpetual vows in 2023. So 87% of the ones who responded said we have no one making their perpetual vows, right? In total, the religious institutes report 144 newly perpetually professed members, again, 68 women and 76 men in 2023. Okay, now for the positive things. So the average age of responding religious of the profession class of 2023 was 36. Half of the responding religious are 33 or younger. So it means that it's skewing towards a younger group, younger generation, and typically religious orders, they want younger members because you are taking care of people basically for the rest of their lives, and so you do have to take care of their health care as they get older. And so they really want younger members because they want to make sure you can have a really long time in the religious order, but also they need the younger members to help take care of the older members, right? So a lot of religious orders, they're dependent upon their younger members to go work out as teachers or in the hospital so that they can then use that money to help care for the older sisters, okay? So this is what we see a lot in religious life, which is a beautiful thing. I mean, it's what we see in families, that children take care of their parents and they take care of their grandparents. And so in religious life, these are their older sisters who they have to take care of. So it's not this sort of burden, but it's just what they have to do. And we know that sisters don't get paid a lot. So they really are in need of financial aid, which is why, again, we have that collection by the USCCB each year. So some more positive things about those who responded. And many of these are very similar to what the priest responded and whenever they did the one for the guys being ordained to the priesthood. So 9 in 10 responding religious have been Catholic since birth, so that's 90%. That's a pretty promising sign, right? That means that most of them have always been Catholic. 94% for women religious, so that means 94% of the women who responded have been Catholic all their lives. 85% for the male religious. Almost all respondents, 94%, that was the percentage, report that when they were children, they had at least one parent who was Catholic. Nearly 9 in 10, 86%, report that both parents were Catholic. 91% for women religious who say both parents were Catholic. 81% for male religious. So this was very similar to the priesthood one, right? That for priests, about every year when they surveyed the men being ordained to priesthood, it's about 90% say that their parents were both Catholic, okay? And so I highlight that because it doesn't mean that just because a Catholic couple are faithful and practicing their faith and have a happy marriage, that all their children are going to become priests or live good Christian lives. That's not what I'm saying, because we have free will. So someone can become an atheist and have great Catholic parents, right? But it does follow that the majority of those who do become priests and religious come from Catholic families, okay? The majority. It doesn't mean all. Like I said, I didn't come from where both my parents were Catholic, but the majority do, and I think that's a very positive sign. It means that when you live a good Catholic life and you teach your children about that, it rubs off on them, and in those types of family situations, it helps children to discern well, okay? And so I think it's not surprising to me that 90%, both for priests and religious, would say that both of their parents, or about that percentage, would say both of their parents were Catholic. About 88% responded they were raised by a married couple living together. And so, again, that's another important thing. 88% raised by a married couple living together who teach them about the faith and help them to learn what it means to serve God. Almost all responding religious, about 97%, said they had at least one sibling. It's the same thing for priests, right? The majority of them had siblings. And so another sort of statistic they did was that those who become religious tend to be more educated than the greater Catholic populace. So they tend to have undergraduate, graduate degrees. And so a lot of them typically have graduate degrees. So they typically are more educated than most U.S. Catholics. So I think here it says 43% of responding religious, compared to about 5% of the U.S. adults who are Catholic, say they attended a Catholic college. And the study goes on to say that many of them, through that Catholic college, encounter some sort of religious order and then desire to join that religious order. So that's why so many come from colleges. So the same thing as with the priest, it says that a good percentage of them participated in some form of RCIA or CCD or some religious education program. So when they were kids, they went to CCD or they went to PSR. They were lectors. 55% say they were lectors. 54% say they were altar servers. And of course, that was higher for the male religious, right? So it was 83% for male religious say they were altar servers. And for women, it was about 44%. They were in youth ministry or youth group, right? 45%. So just to show you that they were involved in some way in their church. 8 in 10, 82% participated in Eucharistic adoration. It was the same for priests. The majority of them, that was a big one that helped them discern their vocation. And then 7 in 10 say they recited the rosary, that's 72%, or participated in some retreat. 8 in 10, 82% said that they were encouraged to consider a vocation to the religious life. And it's the same for guys discerning the priesthood. Most of them say someone encouraged them to become a priest. About 45% said it was by a parish priest. And same thing for young men who become priests. The majority of them say that it was a priest who encouraged them, right? So it shows you the power of the parish priest. And then 41% say they were encouraged by a friend. Those are two highest percentages. Most of them are acquainted with their order before they join them, so about 28%. So most of them already know their order, whether it be through school, through their college, through some sort of ministry, through the church where they work at. And the vast majority of them, the biggest thing that helps them to kind of discern what religious order to join is a come and see. So that's why come and see for religious orders is so important, because you go and live with the community and you kind of see what their lifestyle is like, okay? So I haven't given you all these statistics. What's all this mean for the state of religious life in our country, okay? Well, it's really one of the rarest forms of vocations because it's the one that I think has what most people consider the least value, okay? So we live in a very value-oriented culture, and by value I mean we do something, we want something for it, whether it be money, success, whatever it is. And so religious life is kind of a counter to that. You don't go in it for the money. You don't go in it for the success. You don't know what you're going to do because you're under obedience. You might join a teaching order and they tell you to become the vocation director for the order and you never get to teach, right? And so it's a very different lifestyle. And so I think this is the reason in the West, especially, including our country, it's not a very popular lifestyle because I have to take a vow of poverty. I can't own anything, right? I have to be under obedience and be told what to do. I always tell people, they have to check out their cars. They have to go to their superior and say, hey, I've seen it one time. I saw one of the sisters one time have to ask the superior if they could go to Walmart. It's mind-blowing, right? But that's their lifestyle. They can't just do what they want. And so people don't like that. People don't like to be told what to do and when to go to bed and when to wake up and when we're going to eat. People don't like that, okay? That's one reason it's not popular. Again, the fact that you can't have money, you can't own things is another thing that we love in our culture. And so it's not appealing to people to be poor and to take this vow of poverty. And of course, the same with the priesthood. The chastity and celibacy is also a tough one, that people want to be married. And so they don't see this sort of lifestyle of living in a way where you're living for the kingdom and you're not marrying someone. They don't see that as a valuable lifestyle. You can't have children, you won't have grandchildren, you can't have someone to love for the rest of your life. So people don't want to do that. So this is why we don't see a lot of people discerning religious life. We know that, as I showed you in the study, that in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, I think it reached, a crazy point. It just was unheard of the amount of religious we had in our country at that time, right? Probably will never get that again. It just was kind of the recipe for the right things to happen at the right time. But we saw that in the late 60s and the 70s, there was a sharp decline. People started leaving for a variety of reasons, but people started leaving their orders. And so we saw the decline start there. And a lot of orders started to kind of move from their original charisms and started to do new things. So teaching orders started to maybe get into other things. And so we saw orders really change even their types of ministry. Whereas a lot of sisters were teaching, now they were doing other things like outreach and ministry to the poor that they wanted to do a little bit more of. So we saw in the 60s, 70s, 80s a complete change in the way religious life was even lived out by a lot of religious orders. A lot of religious orders started to, some stopped wearing the habit, and not just not wearing the habit, because not to say they have to wear the habit, but also some stopped living in community. So it kind of lost both the differentiation from other people, but also the loss of community. And so we saw a lot of orders start to shrink because of that too, because they didn't have that community to draw people in anymore. And for example, if you look at most of the religious orders today that are booming, it's like the Nashville Dominicans, Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia in Nashville, which, anytime you hear a young woman want to be religious, she wants to join the Nashville Dominicans. And they're a great group, right? And you go there and they have their big, huge convent and diocese are clamoring to get them. I think we tried to get them at one point, but it's just kind of impossible to get them because there aren't that many of them, but they also are kind of spread out all over, and so they're growing. The Sisters of Life in New York, which is an order that was founded in the 90s, mainly in response to abortion, but in response to a lot of different life issues. And they're a very popular order. And it's because of the community life. And people see that, and young women see that, and they want to become a part of that community life. And so we see that those are the orders that are typically growing in our country, the ones that focus on community, the ones that typically wear their habits, and the ones that live out their charism in a way that young women are drawn to it. In our own diocese, we know that the Daughters of the Cross have one. They have one left, right? They've dwindled to one. They have others who joined and kind of joined other communities, but the one who still belongs to the Daughters of the Cross is one, right? Because they kind of went through the same sort of thing, right? They kind of changed what they were doing. They kind of were moving out of teaching. They were getting older. They weren't bringing in new members, and so they just shrank, and then now they have one member. And once she passes away, that's it for the Daughters of the Cross in our country, right? I think they still have some in France, but the one that was here, that's it. And it's kind of sad because they were such a huge part of the church in North Louisiana and all the way down to Central Louisiana and the many things that they did. But they're not the only order that's going to happen to. There are going to be many orders that happens to. They're going to dwindle to one or two, and then they'll cease to exist. And in some sense, that is sad, but it's also in some sense that's what some religious orders are for. They're not meant to be there forever. They're meant to do their mission. The Daughters of the Cross, their big thing was teaching in North Louisiana. They taught a bunch of people, right? So in some sense, they fulfilled their mission. They did what they were supposed to do. I wish they were still around. It'd be nice if we still had them, but they fulfilled their mission, and the sisters did the best that they could. For male religious, it's even starker because, as you saw with the brothers, that's a life that really is kind of unappealing to people. To just be a brother, I can't be a priest, just be a brother. Why would I be a brother, right? And so we don't see many brothers. We don't have any more brothers in our diocese. The last one left, I think, 2 years ago. He was in Ruston. There aren't many I know of in the state. I know of probably 6 or 7 in our state. There might be a few more. But yeah, you don't really see religious brothers, especially brothers who are truly going to be brothers forever. Because you have some brothers who will become priests, and they're kind of on their way. But then you have some brothers who, this is what I want to be, a brother. And that's a very rare thing to find, right? If you go visit St. Ben's, where some of our guys are in seminary, they have brothers there. And so, but they have more priests than they do brothers. So that lifestyle is just also kind of dwindling, but it's an important lifestyle because they live a life that is different from being a priest. And so their life is for prayer, and usually they have a particular role in the community. And they're a part of that community, and they're special to that community, because sometimes that can be seen as a sort of, why didn't he become a priest, right? And you get that sometimes, like, send him to be a priest. We need more priests. It was like, no, he wants to be a brother. He doesn't feel called to be a priest. He feels called to be a brother, to pray. And so again, sometimes people don't see the value in that, and they think, well, it's a waste because this guy could be a priest, and he's not. But brothers have been a part of our religious tradition for history, along with sisters. And of course, religious priests are dwindling as well, but it's a lifestyle that still appeals to young men. It's something I wanted to do when I was in high school. I wanted to be a religious priest, and I applied to the Salesians in New Jersey, and I just ultimately decided not to join them for a variety of reasons. But I kind of even in college felt the call to join them, and so there's still a lot of young men I know who want to be Jesuits or Salesians or Dominicans, and a lot of young men go and become Dominicans because that order is very appealing to a lot of young men. There are a lot of young Jesuits who are doing some awesome things. And so that lifestyle still appeals to people, but just not a lot of people. And so it's kind of a rare form of a vocation, even more rare than the priesthood. So we have to help young people really see the value of these lifestyles. One, they have to see religious, right? Because a lot of them don't know. When I go to Loyola and I'm like talking about religious, sometimes I get a blank stare because they've never seen a religious before. So they're like, I'm like the Jesuits, the Jesuits who started your school, and they're like, what's a Jesuit? It's like, I don't think they realize what a Jesuit is sometimes. I mean, I think I've done a good job of hopefully explaining it to most of the classes. When I first got there, I think they just didn't know what that was. What's a religious priest? Here at St. John's, I'm sure before Sister Pori came, Sister Pori is one of the sisters of the Asaros, and she teaches religion to our 3rd to 5th graders. I'm sure before she came, they probably had no clue what a religious was. Now, if I go to any of those classrooms, say, what's religious? Sister Pori, right? And that's the power of having a sister in a school. It makes it's different, and you can tell the difference in the kids, and the staff has even told me the difference they feel with having a sister there. It just makes things different, which is why we need religious back in our schools. Even if it's just 1 or 2, we need them back in our schools because it adds to that Catholic culture of a school. When you can see a religious sister in her habit, teaching in the classroom, helping the kids, and Sister Pori helps to prepare the kids for Mass, and she does all the Mass planning, and the kids love it, and you can tell that they respect her and that they act differently around her. And so that's what we need in our church. We need more of that in our schools because, again, what makes someone want to become religious when they see a religious? And so if they don't know what a religious is, why would they ever want to do it? And that's why the majority of religious who were polled in this survey say that a good number of them went to a college or some school where their order was, or where they met the order, because again, they saw a person and they say, oh, look at this Dominican sister, I want to be like her. Or look at this Jesuit priest. If they don't see him, they can never consider it. So that's why it's so important to have religious in our diocese. I wish I could get a Jesuit or two to come back here, but it's just not possible. But it would be nice if we could get a Jesuit to come up here. But this is the importance of religious being out in the world. And I think that's been done a little bit better than it has in the past. You see a lot of religious orders trying to do more and getting out there. So when I was in seminary, we would lead a trip up to the March for Life. Baton Rouge would take a trip, and I would tag along with them because they needed seminarians to help. And what we would do is we would stop in Nashville, pick up the Nashville Dominicans. Each bus would get 2 sisters because we wanted the kids to see the sisters, right? And that's where I first learned about them. And I was like, man, these sisters are awesome, right? And one year we stopped in Nashville and we brought the kids in their convent. It's like 500 kids in the sisters' convent. They were everywhere. And I felt kind of bad, but the sisters were so joyful and happy that all these kids were in their convent, able to see their convent, feeding them. And then one year we picked up some of the Sisters of Life when we got to D.C. And so we had the Nashville Dominicans and the Sisters of Life, these 2 great orders. If you go to SEEK, or if you go to the National Catholic Youth Conference, or if you go to World Youth Day, you're going to see Nashville Dominicans, you're going to see Sisters of Life, right? Because they recognize that they have to be sort of role models for young women and showing them that you can be a young woman and become a religious, because most of them are early 20s. Some of them are even, 18, 19. I know there was one sister on bus who I think was like 18 or 19. I was like, wow, I can't imagine joining so early. But we have to see the value in this lifestyle because our religious orders are shrinking. The Franciscans, they had about 5 or so provinces in our country, and then they all came together except for one. Now they're one province. And they had to do that because they're shrinking. And we used to have a bunch of Franciscans in our diocese. Now there are 2 left, right? They used to cover about 7 or 8 churches, and now they're just at 2. And so, again, that the religious orders are shrinking throughout our country. Now in the world it's a little bit different. In other countries they're growing, but in the U.S. We see that they continue to dwindle year after year. So our part in encouraging religious vocations is, one, to highlight our sisters, because we have the Sisters of the Destitute, so the cathedral is kind of always known about sisters, and we know that they teach, so it's good for our kids to see them. They come to Mass, they serve as extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, right? And so it's good for the kids to see that. They see these 2 sisters who are also nurses, and that's good for them to see, but most churches don't have that. Most churches, again, if you ask the kids, like, what's a religious sister? They probably would have some vague idea of what a religious sister is, or have you ever seen a religious sister? And they probably would be like, no, not really. And so that's sad. That's why we need to get our sisters out there. I remember when one of the sisters I saw when they went to the international fair at Loyola, it might have been last year or the year before, they said like some of the girls were coming up like, is this a costume? Like, are you really a sister? And I think they just didn't think it existed anymore. So they were just shocked that she was there in her habit. So it's letting them see that these women are still there, but also that they're very joyful, right? So if you meet a lot of these sisters, they're very joyful people. Not say they have easy lives or don't struggle. They're extremely joyful, and that's what's attractive. That's what was attractive about those Nashville Dominicans and Sister Life on that bus. They were joyful, and all the kids saw it, and they wanted to be around the kids, and they just had positive attitudes and great witnesses. And that's what our young people need to see, and that's what motivates them. One thing that I really found sort of interesting from the study of the religious who were professed last year was that a good majority of them say that they first considered a vocation in religious life at the age of 18. So 18, which means they were probably already at college, and they saw some religious person, and they talked to the sister or the brother, and they're like, wow, I could live this lifestyle, right? So that's impressive because most times it's far younger for young men considering the priesthood, but for religious, it's older. And I think it's because, again, most young people don't meet religious until they go to a Catholic college or until they go through some environment that's very Catholic, where then they then meet them. And then they say, oh, okay, I want to see this lifestyle. I want to go visit your order. I want to visit your community. And then they see it and they really think, oh, yeah, I could do this. But again, if you don't see it, you don't know what it is. And so you can never really discern it. So this is the importance of highlighting the religious in our community. We don't have many, but the ones we do have are very passionate, and they love working with our young people. Or like the Sisters of the Destitute, they do a very special ministry in going to hospitals, and we see a lot of orders like that who minister to the sick or run nursing homes or visit the sick. And that's something that we need in our culture. We need religious also doing things like that because most of them used to do those things, but then as they started to shrink, we lost that in our society. And so we need to make sure that we're building up religious life in our church. So I want to read to you something from Georgetown, the Cara group that does their research, because there was an article that was citing their research that said that, I think, by 2042, there would only be 1,000 nuns left, but that was like a false sort of, not false, but they had misinterpreted their work. Now, they did say by that time it would probably be about 10,000, but not 1,000. But this is what the author of the article wrote in response to that article, that there would only be 1,000 nuns left. The steep decline in the number of sisters is a result of an extraordinary period in the Catholic Church in the United States. The number of sisters in the United States peaked in 1965 at 1,081, 421 sisters. This was far from the historical norm, and the church received decades of service from these women, as most of us could probably attest. After 1965, new entries began to slow. A sister who entered religious life at the age of 25 in 1965 would be 82 years old today. We are unfortunately seeing the passing of this extraordinary generation of women. Yet, women have continued to enter religious life since 1965, and there will be many more than 1,000 nuns left in 2042. The current trend in the data will not continue as the rate of decline will slow and stabilize around a population of sisters that numbers more than 10,000 rather than fewer than 1,000 sisters. So what's going to happen is that, sadly, this great generation of religious sisters are going to, start to pass away as they get older. But there's going to be a younger cohort because there were just so many from the 60s that's why you have so many over the age of 70, because it was just an unprecedented number of sisters. And that, again, I think World War II had to do with that, how religious our culture had become by the 50s. There's a lot of things that probably caused that big sort of influx of women into religious life. A big part of it, you had religion in almost every school. And so children saw them and they're like, well, I want to be like that sister. And then they would join the order. And so that's why I think you had so many in the 1960s, because they were everywhere. And it was a part of kids' everyday lives. That's why you have all these stories about nuns, whether it's good or bad in some cases, is because they were everywhere, right? My mom was taught by the nuns. So my mom, if you can see, you can get the story. My mom grew up in Mooreville, Louisiana, which is about 3 hours south of here. That was the first place that the Sisters of the Sorrows went. So when they came over in 1947, they came over, JFK was a senator, the story, he had to get them in because they didn't have their visas, so he had to pull his JFK connections. So they went down to New Orleans, and they, I think, took up the bayou or something and got to Mooreville. And so Mooreville, where my mom's little town, was the first place they ministered to. My mom, they started a parish that year, I think specifically because the sisters were there, because they named the parish Our Lady of Sorrows. And that's where my grandparents, like everyone who lived, it wasn't like Our Lady Blessed Sacrament was kind of started to minister to African Americans. It wasn't specifically started for that, but most of the people who lived in that area were African Americans, so it kind of was de facto that. But it wasn't like Blessed Sacrament that was actually started to minister to that community. So that's where all my family went, and all my mom's friends, and they had a school, and so my mom and all her, many of her family members went to the school, and it's where the sisters who first came from Italy taught them, and the sisters were learning English, so you can imagine it was a very interesting situation, and my family tells me how the sisters would have to, because they were new, and they have to go around the houses and beg for food because they were getting used to the environment. They didn't know how to grow things yet, and they didn't have enough money, so they would go to all the families and beg, and these families would take care of them. I found out that this brown couch in my grandparents' house that I've slept on many a time as a kid, and then one day my uncle was like, "Yeah, the sisters, they gave that to your grandma back in the day," and so this was a couch that they gave my grandma. I'm like, I hope they never want this couch back. I was like, I probably shouldn't tell this. Now it's live. I probably shouldn't tell the sisters. They might want their couch back for historic purposes. But yeah, the sisters came, and so I feel indebted to the sisters, Our Lady Sorrows, because they did so much for my family. They taught my mom, they taught her siblings, and gave them a good education so that they can go on and live good lives. And so it's one of the reasons my mom wanted me to go to Catholic school, because she had a Catholic school experience. So again, it's important to have that, but again, those sisters who are from that time period, that sort of golden era, they're getting older, and they did a lot of great work, and so now there's just a smaller group of younger sisters who are kind of taking up that work, but it won't be as numerous as it was in the past. But they're going to continue to do good work, and we'll continue to have sisters in our country. It's something that's never going to go away. It's just not going to be as prevalent as maybe it was in the past, and who knows, maybe there might be something one day that pushes more young men and women into religious life, right? Because sometimes that does happen. Again, in some countries there is. There's a boom in religious orders in some countries, and it's just not happening in our country. So those are kind of the trends in religious life. Again, it's the smallest of all the vocations, and probably with the greatest crisis. But at some point it's going to plateau, and you're going to have about the same number entering as sisters probably passing away. And that's kind of going to be good, because it's going to balance off. But until that point, it's going to continue to decline steeply as our sisters get older. But it was cool to read that report, and it's for anybody who wants to read the report put out by the National Religious Retirement Office. But it broke down every diocese and how much every diocese gave. So I went to Shreveport. I was like, I wonder how much Shreveport gave. And I saw it. It was a good amount, but I didn't want to compare it to other dioceses, because I was like, I'm just going to let myself be happy with what we gave. I'm not going to compare. But it was cool because you could see every diocese, right, what they gave. But as I was reading the report, it shows the importance of us giving to that collection that weekend, because oftentimes these sisters, maybe they don't have any younger members. So they might have no one to take care of them. And they gave their whole lives to the church, were paid basically nothing as teachers and or any other profession. So we should take care of them, right? We should take care of these older sisters. We should care for these older brothers and priests who gave their lives so that many of us could have great educations or get health care, whether it be the sisters who started hospital systems, like the hospital in Monroe, right, that the sisters founded there, or Shumpert that I think they eventually took over. And so we have to recognize the great things that religious sisters and brothers and priests did in our country. The universities, all these Catholic universities that these religious orders started, right? And it's insane. Or the high schools, Loyola, St. Vincent's, Notre Dame, all these schools that were started by these religious. Or when we started a parochial school, whether it be here or at St. Joseph, who did they call in? The sisters. We got to bring in the sisters, right? And so they did so much to build up the church in the U.S. The church in the U.S. would not be where it is, even as it's declining. It would not even be in the state it is today if it wasn't for the religious brothers and sisters and priests who were often missionaries, who would go to the areas that you didn't have enough diocesan priests, and so they would go, like the Jesuits who came here, because they were on mission, and they wanted to build up the church. The Daughters of the Cross who left France to come to North Louisiana and Central Louisiana to start schools, and many of those schools are still around. So we're really indebted to this group of great men and women. And so anyone who says, what value is that lifestyle? It's like, well, let me bring you to Loyola in New Orleans. Let me bring you to Holy Cross in New Orleans. And then you tell me whether or not this is a valuable lifestyle. I haven't started my own college yet. I would love to start my own college, but it's not happened, nor would it be prestigious, okay? So colleges start all the time, but they're not prestigious colleges. So this is the beauty of religious life and how much they've done in our country in building it up. And we have to recognize that this is something we have to encourage our young people to consider. It's important, right? And going all the way back, the first bishop in the U.S. was religious. I believe I'm correct in that. He was a Jesuit. And so we have to recognize how much the religious did in building this country up, even before it was a country. So those are the sort of trends of religious life and why we need to encourage it, why we need more sisters in our schools, and hopefully the trend here in our own diocese of more sisters in the schools is going to keep getting better, right? I think the bishop wants more sisters in schools. I want more sisters in the school. I know St. Joseph wants sisters in the school. So I think that trend is going to keep growing in our diocese at least, but also in other dioceses. We just brought up 3 sisters from Mexico, and they're awesome, and I know they're going to be doing a lot of ministry throughout our diocese. So there are sisters out there, there are brothers out there. My goal is to find a way to get us a brother up here somehow. I kind of have some ideas. It might not be for a whole year, but I think there's some ways to maybe get them to come up for a little bit of time. So that's kind of something I'm praying about because we need brothers too as well. So those are the trends in religious life. Now I'll leave time for questions, either about this talk or the past 2 talks I did or anything about vocations that you might have. Yes.
Well, Father, I feel like, you keep mentioning the 60s, and every time I say Vatican II, because I am 71 years old, and like our table, we were all educated by the religious, and we saw what happened. I mean, I saw on black and white TV when the nuns walked out of the old, chapel to go off and do different things. But that's what I see where we lost everything. And I think the church started following the culture instead of staying true to themselves and having the culture follow us. And I mean, I was at one talk and someone said, no, the church hasn't changed. Well, the church triumphant that Jesus Christ established as king, it has not changed, but we in the church have, we're all big fat sinners. I mean, I don't pray for vocations enough. I don't sacrifice enough. But, I mean, I just think that was the big, why we're lacking now. And it's in all the first world countries. It's in Europe. I mean, they just said 10% of Catholics in Italy go to Mass. And that was the new thing that they just came out with. But look at Africa. I mean, it's on fire. But you know what? Because it's poor, which, is great for your soul because they're having so many vocations. And I just think that, and not to say anything against Sister Carol and Sister Ann, but who would know that they were nuns? When I run into people at the makeup counter at Dillard's, that doesn't inspire me. And and then I know the Dominican sisters, and I know the Sisters of Life, and they're inspiring. I mean, even my daughter was a ballet dancer at Nashville, and the Mother Superior was a ballet dancer. She was a prima ballerina at one time, and she left being a ballet dancer to be a nun. But they're so relatable, but they're just so much more orthodox. And I think that we have lost our way of worshiping and just lost a lot. Maybe it's just my age, because I just think, wow, I mean, we did have all these nuns teach us, and when we were all in the 3rd and 4th grade, we thought about being a nun, I mean, just, and our children, we talked to them about it, and we put them in Catholic schools so they would be exposed to that, but then they left. In some of the orders, they've just gotten so of the world that it's just not the same. And I think the orders that stayed, that wore the full habit dealers and doing this and doing that. I mean, I would just want to have it and sell, and that's just the way I was going to lead my life, because if you have to start picking out clothes, that's a whole nother situation. And that's why I like to see priests in their clerics and or a cassock, just because it identifies you and it lifts you up. And I don't know if they realized that when they threw all that out, then they threw out, that reverence and respect, and I feel like that's the reason that we're not seeing a lot of vocations. I mean, that's the way I feel, but I mean, I pray for them all the time. And
Yeah.
I want more people, so our children and grandchildren can be taught our religion, because that's the best example, and that's the way that they would pick a vocation.
Yeah.
I do think it's a calling from God too, and God has to call you.
Absolutely.
I mean, and like you were called, and you answered yes, and thank you for your vocation.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's kind of, if I can quickly say some things on that. So yeah, I think what a lot of sisters were trying to do post like the 1960s was they were trying to be more sort of receptive to the culture, because they saw like if we dress maybe like everyone else, people might be more, it might invite them more. And that was kind of the movement that happened. And so I think it doesn't necessarily like, it isn't a sign of like orthodox or anything, but it also, it is, you don't know that they are a sister. And so, yeah, like I said, some priests don't wear their clerics. Like they might wear them at the church, but if they're not on church property, they don't wear their clerics, which isn't a bad thing. But you're right, if they're out at the store, them not wearing their clerics, someone will never know. But maybe if they are wearing it, they may have a person who's left the church who might say, hey, oh, look at that priest. Or just some kids who say, oh, look, a priest shopping. So it is a difference in terms of for sign. But yeah, I remember, for instance, there was one sister who, this parish that we were tied to in the seminary, St. Rita in New Orleans, and she had just started there. She was a sister of the Sacred Heart or something like that, or Holy Cross sister. Yeah. And I remember, they would have a hard time getting the kids like to stop talking when they were dismissing them. And man, when sister would start talking, those kids, it was like I was like brought back to the 1960s, because her commanding voice, but she didn't wear a habit, but she still had that sort of commanding presence. They knew that she was a sister. But again, if the kids didn't know that she was a sister, then they would have maybe thought she was just another teacher. So you are right that it does help sort of identify that this person is a religious, and it does kind of carry a sign, which is why a lot more religious orders are kind of going back to that, because they see the importance of wearing the habit and people needing to see it, because it does kind of help them. But there are a lot who don't wear the habit, who are just as faithful and live good lives. But I think what happened in the 60s, I think Vatican II was very prophetic and very sort of, it was a council, so the Holy Spirit guided it, right? So the Holy Spirit knew what was coming, okay? But what in the 60s was crazy, right? So maybe some of you lived through the 60s. And it was crazy before Vatican II. Like even while Vatican II was going on, it was crazy. Like, and this stuff had even started in the 50s, right? Like first you get the beatniks, and then you get, that just kind of leads to the hippies, right? So it's not like it just came out of this vacuum, but I think that there was already this sort of cultural change that was happening. I mean, there was already, at some point, certain non-Catholic churches had already recognized that birth control was okay. Like 1960s, I believe it was in the 50s. So you already saw these sort of cultural changes, but I think the 60s it just kind of like exploded. And I think after Vatican II, people kind of misinterpreted the council and then used the council to then sort of fit their agenda. And then just kind of...
They really changed things that were in the council, and to me,
yes.
there was one or two bad cardinals that kind of took it and ran with it, and popes had talked about this modernism and this stuff that was already creeping into the church, and I just feel like the church is just not as pure or as holy as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, the people, you're right. The church is holy, but the people are... Yeah, and I mean, that's always been the case, but I think, if you read some of the things that were happening at the Mass in the 70s, because there wasn't that much formation yet with the new Mass, It's crazy. Like, I mean, I've read some stuff where I'm just like, and I'm sure you've experienced, I can't believe it because I didn't grow up with that kind of, like, I grew up with a church that had kind of calmed down and started to say, this is not what the council wanted. This is what the council wanted, right? I had to, I mean, I still saw a few crazy things, but by the time it got to me, it already calmed down. But 70s and 80s, there was some crazy stuff, at the mass, and so.
We were told, guess what? We were in confession, you were told, oh, if you don't, it's up to your own conscience whether you contracept or not. We would have group confession, like the ship was sinking, but we would be in a church, and one
Yes.
priest would give us absolution, didn't have to say one sin, we were forgiven.
Yeah, and I think there's the difference between like the reality of what what the Vatican Council wanted and the reality, right? It's like, because sometimes I'll go back and I'll read, there was the old sacramentary, and it was before the 2011 translation, and because sometimes priests would just ad lib. So I was like, I'm going to go back in the sacramentary and see, does it say these in similar words? And nowhere did I see. So it means that people were just doing what they wanted to do, right? That the church never allowed for priests to just say what they wanted. They just were saying what they wanted. And some of them were being taught that in seminary. So it's not their fault. Some guys were being taught, you should make up the words. And that's why sometimes you do see priests. It's not their fault, it's how they were formed. It's what their professors taught them. Maybe even their bishops encouraged them. And so just to know that. So I want to move on to any more questions. That was good points.
Do you know about Sister Dulcie?
No.
She's out of Baton Rouge, and we were there for St. Joseph's Day. We've been there several other times, and they are building this tremendous convent because they have so many young novices, and it was so beautiful because when we were on the grounds, it was their adoration hour, and to see them all go into that chapel in their habits. So there is a growing community down there of religious sisters.
That's awesome.
So if you ever get the opportunity to go to her spirituality center, it is just, it's on this beautiful property, and I would highly recommend going. And just to see them, just touches your heart, especially those who grew up with the nuns being all around.
That's awesome. I have heard of them actually from some people.
And I don't know exactly what their mission is.
I don't either. I've heard of the main sister, but I've never heard of or what her community does specifically. Yeah. Question back?
I hope it's a common setting aside everything that we've talked about the last 3 weeks, setting aside Catholicism directly, is there a broader positive trend towards Christianity across the globe, regardless of specific orders, Christianity, for Catholicism?
In the Western world, no. In Asia, like South Asia areas, yes. In African countries like Nigeria, Kenya, other places, Democratic Republic of Congo, yes. But outside of like South Asia and Africa, no. Everywhere else is bad. Like everywhere else is just like, I mean, even like South America, which is again a stronghold of Catholicism, it's more people are leaving the church and joining evangelical churches, non-denominational, or just leaving the faith, period. Like I'm talking Brazil, Argentina, like these very Catholic countries. Even in Mexico, I mean, Mexico is like one of the most Catholic countries. Even in Mexico, it's a trend where it's kind of not very bad, but you see people leaving.
I guess what I'm asking is, outside of Catholicism,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, period. For every denomination, yeah, it's a decline, yes, for Christianity. The Western world is becoming more and more secular, not really atheist, but sort of agnostic, even kind of pagan in some places. Yeah, it's becoming more and more sort of, it's almost like a post-Christian society. I don't think we've gotten to that point in the US, but in Europe, it's really almost a post-Christian society. Yeah. So, any last question? Why don't, what did you have? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why our nation's having a National Eucharistic Congress. I don't even know the many graces that are going to come from that Congress. Like, I don't think we recognize the power it's going to have. And I think it really has already done a lot of good in our country for a lot of people. And I think it's going to continue to do that and do so much more. And I don't want to leave you all with a sort of downcast negative view, but we have to know our church and the reality of the landscape. The church is always living a reality. What's the reality? How many people come to church? What are we dealing with? But that just gives us a greater need to evangelize, to preach the gospel, and to spread the good news. Because the more people we have who are unchurched, it means that's more people who can become Catholic because they don't know Jesus Christ. It's not even that they have a faith. They might know who Jesus Christ is, but they might have never gone to a church or ever prayed a day in their life. And so that's sort of very fertile ground for the proclamation of the gospel. And so we have to recognize that, yes, a lot of people are leaving, but that means that there's a lot of people we can bring back. And we have to work with the Holy Spirit and know that it's going to be God ultimately who brings people back into the church, but he wants to use us as his instruments. And so we can't just sort of throw our arms up in the air, and that's why I present these statistics. Now, I don't want people to throw their arms up in the air because you can see in the West the church is growing. So it's not like our church is dying, it's growing in certain parts, and it has to do with demographics, people moving, but it shows you that the church is still alive. And so we just have to find ways to kind of fan it back into flame so that people start coming again. So thank you all for coming to these talks, and I hope to do something else like this again, probably in August or September, and have another teaching series. So I appreciate it, and I pray that you all continue to have a very happy Easter. We can end in prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you all.